Welcome back. The final video I'm going to make in the basic ownership series for Robo JetFloss owners involves the daily cleaning needs of the commercial cotton candy making machine. Because of the buildup of sugar floss that occurs through the repeating heating and cooling cycles, it's actually very important that you clean the machine thoroughly at the end of each day. I'll cover that in greater detail as we take the machine apart. But because you are only working essentially with sugar, the cleaning isn't quick, but it is quite simple. For the most part, the only thing you're going to actually need to service this machine on a daily basis is going to be a flathead screwdriver, a 7mm nut driver, possibly a toothbrush. It's not required, but I do find it handy. I strongly recommend a small glass. There's a lot of small parts involved, and it's easiest to clean them in a glass so you don't lose them. A small dish or bowl, which will become obvious why that's very helpful shortly. And while not required, I do actually recommend simple green. It'll make cleaning the actual heater coil slightly easier. The first parts that you clean are really just a matter of running them under hot water. The snow control tool can simply be rinsed in a sink, utility tub, in hot water. The sugar is going to dissolve very easily and very quickly, and then just set it out to dry. Likewise, the bowl can be removed and additionally just rinsed in hot water. There's really no scrubbing even required. The sugar will dissolve pretty easily. Shower, tub, utility tub, outside hose. It will be quicker if you can access hot water, however. The hotter the better, simply because that will dissolve the sugar faster. As for cleaning the machine itself, this is where the tools come in. It does require just a little bit of disassembly. It's very easy to do. It's not difficult, but because of the heating of the sugar, it really gets caked on in a couple of places, and it won't be fast, but it won't be difficult. So I'm going to move to close-up shots from here on out so you can see exactly what I'm going to do as I step through the process. So the first step to actually cleaning the machine itself actually is just to pick it up by the handles and either put it on its side or hold it upside down and give it a gentle shake over a trash can so that you can get the excess floss, or as much as possible, out of the spinning head. This isn't required, but the less floss in the bowl, the easier the cleaning process will be, and the less of a mess you'll make. After that, what I like to do is to remove the entire stator assembly with the silicone sealing collar and rings still in place. That makes it easier for me to clean the whole thing, and also the fewer times I have to remove the collar and the ring, the less likely they are to break. Again, the silicone is flexible, but less handling is better, and if you stretch them too much, they can snap. Frankly, I don't see any reason to take them off of the stator any more than necessary. So if you take the wing nuts off of these four posts, this will simply slide off as a unit. You rinse this in a sink utility tub with hot water both inside and out, set it out to dry, and that part is essentially clean. It doesn't require any further work. After you've removed the stator, you can also remove the rotor with 3 screws here, machine screws, using just a flathead screwdriver. This is not really required on a regular basis, but I will do so now just so that you see how simple it is, and also so that when it comes time to inspect the rings, we can do that later. But this would not be ordinarily required on a daily basis by any means, maybe once a week. So as you remove the bolts and nuts and washers from around the machine, this is why I recommend you have just a small glass and you throw all the parts in here. You're going to end up with a bunch of them. They are small, they're very easy to lose. I just put them all in here and then use hot water, let them soak for a couple minutes. That's about all it really takes. If you don't do that, I pretty much guarantee you will lose them. But once the 3 machine bolts have been removed from the rotor, that will slip off, and again, just rinse in hot water. It doesn't really require any other service. At this point, we need to remove the head of the bowl, and again, flathead screwdriver. There's just 3 machine threaded bolts in place. We'll take these off one at a time. Once you have the 3 machine head screws removed from the top of the bowl, you may find that you can just pry it off. If it sticks because of the floss melting and acting like a little bit of a glue, just give the outside edges of it a gentle tap with something soft like the top of a screwdriver, and that will loosen it up enough that you can pull it off. The top of the bowl can simply be rinsed in hot water. You'll seldom get much collection in there, and it doesn't require any special treatment. Once we've removed the top of the bowl, you'll see the inside has a lot of sugar floss, and I'm going to zoom in even closer so you can see how this needs to be taken apart and a couple of points about putting it back together. Now with a real top-down view on the inside of the bowl, this wing nut comes off the center post. You won't need a tool for it, followed by a metal washer and a plastic insert. Note on the insert, it's flat on the top. The bottom has recessed cavities to cover these two brass nuts. The brass nuts are why you need the 7mm nut driver. Just to start them loose, you can finish with your fingers, but this will start the loosening process. On top of the two brass nuts, you're going to have a lock washer and a flat washer for each. And then beneath that, you'll also have a flat washer, which can be either removed or left in place during the cleaning process. I tend to remove everything. It just makes it easier. As long as I know everything's there, then I know how to put it back together. So underneath these wires, you are going to have another flat washer. Put all the parts in the glass, clean them all at once. So I'm going to lift the entire coil and outer wall off of the motor platform so that you can get an idea of just how much sugar floss is going to be built up in here. And this gives you an idea of the part of this process that's difficult to clean. Not that the sugar is necessarily hard to get rid of. However, what we want to do is we want to do that without getting water or moisture on any of these electrical connections. Not because they will melt like the sugar, but simply because any water introduced there could cause corrosion at the connection points. And corrosion will then introduce resistance, which could lower voltage to the coil, and that would affect the performance in terms of production of the machine. So getting this part clean without getting the electrical connections wet, that's the part that takes a little bit of time. It's not difficult, but you do have to be patient. So what you're looking at now is how I actually clean the coil and ring as a first step. And the reason that we recommend a bowl or a small food service type storage container, I think this one is from Glad, but I'm not positive. It's actually one of their disposable units, comes in a multi-pack, and what I like about it is the width is not much wider than the coil and the ring itself, which makes it perfect, doesn't use a lot of water, and keeps it from falling over. And you see by filling it only partial way, I can dunk the whole system in here and let it dissolve the sugar for me without having to do much work. You can aid knocking off the big pieces with your fingers or with a toothbrush as time goes along. It will take a while for the sugar to dissolve, though. It's been cooked on with high heat, and I find to change the water quite a few times during the process. What I'll do really to make this as efficient as possible is if I'm cleaning this at home, I'll actually put it in the water, put it in the microwave for 30 seconds, get it really about as hot as I can. Remember, this thing at its operating temperature melts sugar into liquid, so these parts are not going to be affected by hot water. The hotter you can get it, the faster it will dissolve, and as I say, during the process, feel free to reach in and knock off the big pieces to make it move along faster. It will save you time, but there's going to be a lot of small intricate pieces that you can't get off simply by waiting. So do the best you can just with your fingers to get it cleaned up. Let it soak, change the water frequently. As it gets a whole lot of sugar in it, it loses its ability to take on more. The deck itself, I will just turn the system on its side, usually over a sink. And again, this is where I use the toothbrush just to knock the extra sugar out of the little pieces and the grooves and the threads. I don't know that that's required, but it seems to make assembly a little bit easier putting it back together. So I'm going to spend probably 10 or 15 minutes changing the water and letting this soak to make my life easier, and then I'll bring the coil back to you when it's close to clean and show you the next step in getting it really perfected. Okay, so I've had the bowl here soaking with hot water, and I've had the coil rotated and moved in and out of this probably 10 or 15 times. The water's been changed in equal number. I've microwaved it, gotten it as hot as possible, trying to get all of the sugar floss that is hardened out of this coil. And if you look at it, it looks very clean to the eye. Note that even when it looks clean to the eye, if you change the water and make it very hot with a microwave, you'll still get it turning pink or blue or whatever color floss you were working with, because the sugar is caught in the cracks and even behind the coil. So most people would consider this done at this point. I actually don't. I keep soaking it and getting it hot until the water doesn't change colors any longer. And then I go one step further. What I'll do is I'll actually push on this coil pretty firmly and tug on the ends here slightly and actually try and get the coil to separate from the outer ring housing. And you can do that once you've got it clean enough. If there's any sugar in there still gluing it essentially to the outer housing, then you'll know that it's still dirty. But if you work on it long enough, you can in fact get all of the sugar out and it will free itself. And from this point, you'll see the reason that I do that is just to make sure that I've got everything 100% clean. And you can see there's a little bit of black buildup of carbon where the sugar has been burnt. And so what I'll do is I'll go at this with probably like a Scotch-Brite pad. Actually, you can see I can actually get most of it just with my fingers. But once I have the coil removed, I'll go through the inner ring with like a rough Scotch-Brite pad, get it perfectly clean. This is where the simple green that I recommend comes in handy. I will put this entire outer housing ring in very hot water and use a little simple green and a Scotch-Brite pad and maybe a toothbrush, because this is really important to understand. The cotton candy is actually made by extruding the liquid through these laser cuts. And if you don't get this really super clean and you allow carbon to build up and block up in these slats, these little tiny cuts in the metal itself, that affects your future production. So I like to get this just as clean as possible until it can't be cleaned any further. Now, it's not hard to do. Like I say, you can put this in incredibly hot water, spray on a little simple green, just use a Scotch-Brite pad. It cleans up very easily now because I don't have to worry about getting this wet. But I really do want it clean. The coil I'll inspect carefully, and if I don't know if the video camera will pick it up, but as clean as it looked on the outside, you may not be able to see it, but I can find that there are bits of sugar, there are bits of carbon buildup still on the inside, actually quite a number of them, and that's not surprising to me at all, because no matter how much hot water I soak it in, as long as the outside of the ring is pressed against the actual housing, that makes it tough for the water to circulate. So I'll spray this outside with simple green, let it sit for 5 minutes, and then I'll go through another couple routines of soaking in hot water in the bath that I'm using, either in a Tupperware type material or a bowl, and use maybe a little bit of a sponge or the toothbrush on the outside. The reason that I'm so careful about this is because, like with any appliance, if you think of a heater coil and a stove or an oven, if you clean off the carbon that builds up from the heated sugar each and every time you use it, it's very easy to do. But like a stove or a heating coil in your toaster oven, for example, once it starts to layer and get heated subsequently in repetitive sessions, if you don't keep it in a perfectly clean condition, you'll probably never get it back to a clean condition. And I'm not worried about cleanliness for the sake of impressing anyone. It's not like friends and neighbors come over and are going to ever know that my coil isn't clean. But not having a perfectly clean coil affects the ability to quickly heat sugar to the liquid point because that carbon acts as an insulator. And additionally then, that could, well, it not only could, but it will end up blocking these laser cut channels in the housing and preventing the free flow of sugar, again affecting the ability to produce high quality cotton candy quickly. And worst case scenario, enough buildup can cause the motor to be off balance. And again, remember, this Robo JetFloss spins at 3,600 RPM. So if you get a lopsided buildup of carbon inside of this housing, that affects the ability for this to rotate on balance, and ultimately bad things can happen. So I'm very particular about this. Again, it is not hard. It doesn't take long. The hot water will do the work for you. I haven't so far scrubbed this with so much as I haven't even used the toothbrush on it. I've just soaked it in hot water and let the hot water do the work. But I've had to change the water repetitively, and I'm going to do a little more soaking now that the coil is separated. I will actually use, like I said, a Scotch-Brite just on this ring, but it won't even take me 60 seconds. I'll spray this with simple green just once, just to give it a chance to soak into the laser cuts, because this is probably the most important part in terms of creating the floss. And while it won't take long, I want to do my very best to make sure that I maintain the equipment in a way that it will always produce for me very high quality. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. That won't take but a few moments. I'll come back and walk you through how to quickly inspect the brushes and the rings on the machine, and then I'll give you a few tips on how to reassemble it, not just quickly because it doesn't really take long, but how to get it balanced and do it efficiently each and every time. All right, before we start reassembling the unit, I'm going to show you where you can inspect the brushes and the brass rings. From the very front, if you look here, this access port, if you use a flashlight, you'll be able to see inside. All you're looking to do is to inspect and see that it looks about like this, that you've got solid contact from the brushes on the brass rings, and the brass rings themselves don't look terribly scarred, pitted, or damaged. When you look at the brushes, that's to the left, those two black things that are transmitting the energy to this spindle. You just want to look at this and make sure, again, that these are relatively flat. They're not chipped, cracked, broken, falling apart, anything of that nature. So the machine's totally serviceable. Those are easy parts to replace. I'm not saying you need to inspect those frequently. Every couple of months, maybe take a peek in there as you're cleaning the unit and just make sure that there's nothing obviously going wrong on either side. So with that, we'll proceed to assembly of the machine. It doesn't take very long at all, and I'll simply point out the couple areas you want to take special precautions. All right, back from a couple more dips in the bath, and you can see that with just 60 seconds of a little simple green and hot water, the outer housing now is as clean as it's going to ever need to be, and perfectly clean on the heating coil as well. So really the only thing to do to the heating coil is slip it back inside of the housing. You'll see that initially it doesn't look like it's going to fit, and you'll wonder, well, how are you going to achieve that? Generally speaking, all you have to do is start it at an angle, and because the coil is sort of a springish material, if you gently pull and twist on it, you'll be able to work it like a slinky and get it to fit in, and there she goes. So you fiddle with it for a little bit. Never stretch it out, but if you squeeze these together sort of like a spring coil slightly, as you manipulate it, you'll have no trouble centering it. And note that the actual coils themselves, they don't have to be touching when they're inside. Just manipulate them with your finger from both sides, and you can get them pretty close to perfect. Also, when removing it or trying to adjust the coil, strongly suggest you don't pull on it. Better to push it in from side to side, and when you're removing it, do the same thing, push it out. If you do pull on the coil at any point, you can deform it and bend it out of shape and make it a little bit hard to work with. I've done that before where first time I tried it, I was pulling on the coil and it ended up rather stretched out. Don't worry if that does happen. You can sort of force it back into place and then it will reshape. But to prevent it from happening in the future, it's always better to work by pushing it where you want it to go instead of pulling. And so just a little bit of manipulation. Get it back inside, and we'll work on reassembly here in a moment. So the first step in reassembling is to slip the impeller over the deck and attach it with the 3 machine screws, making sure the flat washer is touching the impeller, followed by the lock washer. And what I'll do is I'll make these just slightly snug so that I can adjust the impeller. And if you get your head down level here and look at the gap between the deck and the impeller and spin it by hand a couple of times, you can make sure that it's level. If you see it wobbling up and down, you can adjust one side or the other of this until you get it close to level. It doesn't have to be perfect, but obviously the more balance you have, the better. Then I'll go ahead and finish tightening down the machine screws with the flathead screwdriver and move on to the next step, which is to put on the outer housing with the heating coil. Now you have 2 options for doing this. The preferred option is to put it on with one of the mounting posts in between the coils. And I'm going to go to an overhead shot here so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So in the overhead shot, what I want you to realize is that when you slip it on in the right position, each of these wires will be properly lined up to go on the brass mounting post. So this would be incorrect. This is one possible variation. These wires do line up, but notice the position of the coil. It's in the middle of 2 mounting posts. The factory ship position is going to be this option here, with the post being in between these two mounting coils. This generally is going to give you the best balance when the machine is rotating at high speed. You'll find it a little snug, and you'll have to push a little bit and tug as you put it together. But this is what they call position A. So the wires naturally line up, yet the coil wires are separated just by hugging this mounting post. So as you rotate it, there's three separate ways you could put in. This is the preferred method. If you find that your machine seems to be slightly off balance and rotating at high speed, it's probably because you've got it in one of the other positions. So try this one instead. If, however, you find your machine has a little more vibration than you care for, you can try position B. And position B would be where the mounting posts are lined up with the wires, but these coil intersections are here in between two mounting posts instead of surrounding one. So this is position B. It is usually not preferred. And this is position A, and this is the way it ships from the factory and is preferred. You want to make sure you get the outer housing sitting off on the ledge on the platform, and then we're going to assemble the washers and the nuts onto the brass posts, and the sequence is pretty straightforward. First thing that goes on is a flat washer on each side. Then you will put on the wire connectors. After that, another flat washer, then a lock washer, and then finally the 7mm nuts. So it's flat washer, connector, flat washer, lock washer, 7mm nuts. They do not need to be tightened excessively, and they really should not be tightened excessively. So just snug is all that's required here. And this is the 7mm nut driver that is really one of the only tools you need for ordinary operation and maintenance of the unit. Get it just barely snug, just barely. You obviously don't want it loose and vibrational, but there's no real need for any excessive force here. You then have this plastic washer that has an upside and a downside. The downside has recesses to protect the nuts. Once that is slipped over and snug, put on the big metal washer here, and we finish up this assembly part simply with a wing nut, and again just a little snug. That doesn't have to be particularly tight. And the final part of assembling the washer bowl is simply to put on the top and the 3 included machine screws, and we will snug those down, and this part of the assembly then will be complete. So after I put the cap back on and tighten up the 3 screws, my only advice there is to not over tighten the screws. They are going into an aluminum lid, and the screws are stainless steel. So if you over tighten them, you do run the risk of stripping out the head or warping it. Even though the machine does spin at like 3600 RPM, there's a lot of rotational force, but there isn't really any lift involved. The bowl doesn't try to separate. So get them snug, but not what I would call tight. It's not necessary, and you don't want to damage the lid. After that's been done, simply set the entire stator assembly back on. Use 4 wing nuts, attach that. Again, I leave the silicone pieces attached, rinse and dry them in place so I don't have to worry about stretching them constantly and worry about breakage. And then what I like to do is turn the machine on, run it for maybe 15 seconds at a fairly low voltage. 60 is fine, and that's just to get it to warm up a little bit so that then it will accelerate any drying, just in case there has been some moisture that's reached the wires or the connections. I'm not saying that's necessary, but I figure that helps dry it out quicker, evaporate any moisture that may have potentially entered into the electrical connections where the coil meets the electrical system, and so not required, but it seems like a good idea to me, so that's what I do. That concludes really all the cleaning and maintenance you're going to have to do to this unit. It is commercial grade equipment and should last for an incredibly long period of time. The only parts that are likely to need maintenance on a regular basis are the brushes and the rings, as is typical with any electrical motor system, and as long as you inspect them, you'll never be caught by surprise, and that can be taken care of ahead of time. Thank you very much. I hope you find this video series to be useful, and enjoy your Robo JetFloss cotton candy machine.